Hello class, today we're going to look at project management and methodologies. We're going to look at some project management tools and crafting your vision statement. This is all stuff you're going to need for project proposal 1, so let's dive in and see what it looks like. Okay, so how do we as organizations advance and grow? We do it through projects, right? So what do you think the IT project failure rates are? 50%, 65%, 70%? It's actually over 2/3. Fewer than 1/3 projects actually come in under budget or on budget and on time. So the role of a project manager is becoming more and more important. And this is actually a recent addition to most workforces. It's happening all throughout most engineering fields, most STEM fields for that matter. Anything where you have teams working together. It's pretty common in civil engineering and construction, has been for a while, but it's definitely a recent addition to most other engineering fields, with software having a massive role for the project manager and project owner. We'll take a look at jobs and some of these statistics in class. It's also becoming a structured and scientific field, so this isn't just people who are good at dealing with other people, though those skills are required. You need solid people skills, but you need more than that too. And we're going to look into how these methodologies developed and what they are. You can also get a PMI certification, which is a huge plus. Like I said, whenever we take a look at this jobs link in class, you'll see that there are distinct jobs for just project managers. Okay, so what is a project? Well, it's a series of tasks, and it has a distinct beginning and a distinct end. It's generally goal-oriented, but it's also bound by time, cost, and quality. Okay? It requires resources, materials, and humans as well. It generally solves a problem or satisfies some need, either to the user or to the company. When I worked on Orion, we actually didn't put our software out to any users outside of the company. It was all internal to the labs, but our software that we wrote was used by labs on a weekly basis for hardware testing. So again, it'll either satisfy a problem or a need out in the world or internally. And it stems from a larger strategy or vision from the company. For us, it was completion of and delivery of Orion. And it generally has a customer or sponsor. In our case, it was NASA, and it distinct from a process. Okay, so what do we have? The project life cycle. Well, there's typical phases in a project life cycle. Okay, we're going to have your inception and conceptualization phase. This is going to be the point that you guys are in right now for your project. So your teams are forming up, and you're trying to figure out exactly what it is you want to do. You know, what this is going to look like, what the need is for whatever it is you're designing. And then we're also going to look at planning, and then the next phase of that would be planning. And this is where you're going to set up, how are we going to attack this problem? What does this look like? What's our timetable? Things like that. Then you're going to have the execution. This is the part you've basically done in all of school so far, is a lot of execution. Here's an assignment, do this code. And then you have the termination or the wind up, and this is kind of where you get into the really heavy documentation phase and things like that. So this is generally what a project life cycle would look like in its separate stages. So as you can see, as we build up towards execution, man hours grows. And so and as well as that, we don't have team members on here, but that also tends to grow as you get into execution. So whenever I came onto Orion, they were actually hiring a lot of engineers, and they were already past conceptualization and planning, and we were right in the middle of execution. And so as those hours grow, you'll also see teams grow as well. Now you guys are fixed size teams, so obviously the hours will have to adjust accordingly. But what you don't want is for this graph to just continually go up, and then termination basically be a hard stop at the peak of your execution. That generally means you had poor planning. Okay, so how do we define success? Generally, especially out in the real world, this tends to be the top three things we have here. It came in on time, it came in on budget, and it meets the objectives. Okay? So it's the triple constraint model: time, cost, and scope. And now you're starting to see, and with Agile you'll see how this works in, we have the quadruple constraint model, which is essentially we add customer satisfaction. And you're like, well, if it meets the objectives, wouldn't the customer be satisfied? But what you're going to find is that the customer doesn't always know what they want, and so they may describe requirements to you that aren't actually what they're looking for. And so we'll get into that a little bit more later. So here we have a triple constraint model, and this is basically showing you the constraints. Now again, based on the last slide, you could see we could add a fourth point to this, basically have a cube, and try and meet all of these. So your goal is basically that the project is delivered within cost, and then within time, and then it meets the scope, no more or no less, and that you hit the customer's quality requirements. Okay, so what is project scope? Easily understood, it's the sum of requirements. It's essentially, if it can't do whatever, I don't want it. Or better said, it must be able to do this, or I want the system that will. And this is kind of framed in the way that the customer would pose the statement to you. So what you're trying to do is figure out what's in and what's out. Okay? Okay, so continuing on scope, again, it's basically everything about the project. It's the work that must be done, the results that will be delivered, and the solution that is provided. So the scope must be managed. Just here you can basically see scope equals requirements. So most projects that fail do so due to unmanaged scope. Okay, so whether they're undefined requirements, poorly defined requirements, shifting requirements. And I'd actually add another one. You'll find that sometimes software developers, especially in software, since that's what we're dealing with, software developers like to have functionality. And so when designing a tool, especially one that's internal to the team, so maybe not something being delivered to the user, but something that the team needs, they may go overboard. And this is where you really have to watch and make sure your scope doesn't grow. Okay, so we can look at work breakdown structure. This is essentially a way to break down a component or task into the most detailed way possible. And so you basically layer it on, go over it once, and then continue to drill down. So a deliverable-oriented grouping of project elements which organizes and defines the total scope of the project. And like I said, we'll drill down to task. Each descending level represents an increasingly detailed definition of a project component. And a component doesn't necessarily just mean the technical component, it can be a product or a service as well. So here's a breakdown of a working breakdown structure. Make pies for Thanksgiving. You can see we basically listed it as 6 deliverables. So we define the pie menu, then we define set the groceries, the crust, the filling, bake, and finish. And then underneath that, we go down to a more broken down layer, I guess, a more detailed layer. So WP1, interview mom, WP2, document menu, and then so on and so forth. So get your shopping list, check your inventory. And each of these could be broken down even more. So maybe under measure ingredients, you could put right there WP1 underneath crust, measure ingredients for 3.1. We put pull out measuring utensils or whatever. So again, this is kind of a silly example, but it does show that we can break this thing down, and this is what the working breakdown structure looks like. So for successful project management, you need to create a thorough working breakdown structure, as well as manage the scope and requirements changes to ensure that you don't have growing scope. All right, so we've heard the term project management methodologies. Well, ology means the study of. So you have biology, mythology, biology being the study of biosystems, mythology, the study of myths, and so on and so forth. In this case, there are many methods of managing projects. If we study each method, then we could describe this study as project management methodology. But And this is why you'll hear the term methodologies or project management methodology. And now that has morphed into referring to the method itself, not so much the study of the method. So I may ask you, well, what's your project methodology over there at Google? And they might say Agile. Okay, so they're not saying they're studying Agile, it is the methodology they're implementing. So there's many project management methodologies out there. We have system development lifecycle, waterfall, project management body of knowledge, agile, iterative, spiral, extreme. But we're going to actually just look at two of these. Waterfall and agile, they're kind of the classic engineering styles, especially in software. And since that's what we're doing, that's where we'll focus. Waterfall being the older one, it's been around for quite some time. Agile has shown up, I believe, in 2001, the Agile Manifesto came out. But we'll dive in and take a deeper look. All right, so why waterfall? Well, first, here we can see basically a breakdown of the phases of waterfall. We have the feasibility. This is going to be looking at like market analysis, things like that. Then we have the plan, and then from there we design, build, test. Then we go into production, and then we obviously provide support after the fact. So what are the benefits of waterfall? Probably the biggest one is that project sponsors get a clear picture of the complete and final product, and project sponsors get an accurate, detailed estimate of the cost of the project. So the cost, and I would say the time breakdown. As you can see here, each one of these phases is set up well beforehand with timetables set on those phases, and each phase depends on the previous phase. And so continuing on with some of the benefits, there's a go, no-go decision is made at the end of each phase. Requires a detailed and accurate working breakdown structure early on in the project. Again, most of these phases would be broken down in really intricate detail to hopefully determine everything that needs to be done. The scope of the project is locked down at the time and should remain unchanged until the solution delivery. Any changes to the scope must be strictly managed, and a decision to change the scope demands renegotiating the project timeline and cost. So it's basically these last ones where we see most of the problems. This is precisely why so many IT projects fail and why software development managers have embraced Agile. Basically these last three. The scope of the project is locked down at the time. Any changes to this scope must be strictly managed, and then a decision to change the scope demands renegotiating the project timeline and cost. And so if you look here, let's take a look a little bit closer at the build and test phase. So right now, most of you probably know, at least, like take a look at Apple. They're constantly releasing new updates to their software. And we take this cycle for granted, but this wasn't necessarily how it worked. That would fall into support with the releases, but that still is under software management and development. So you would see that we have build, so may build a piece of software and then test it. And after we built it and we're into test, we can't add new features. Whereas that's what you see with something like Apple. And basically that's because Apple is on a cyclic release cycle. So they do build, then test, then build, then test. And so again, that's the main issue of why so many software development projects are embracing Agile, is it naturally fits with software's natural life cycle. So here are some of the challenges of Waterfall. A successful project demands a detailed and accurate work breakdown structure early on. The scope of the project is locked down at the time and should remain unchanged until solution delivery. Notice that's in both the benefits and the challenges. It's a benefit because you can tell the customer exactly when this is going to be delivered, but it's also a challenge because you have to deliver by that date. or you'll have to renegotiate the contract. Changes to the scope, even when well managed, will extend project timelines and cost. Once requirements are defined, customers are much less engaged during the design and construction phases. And this is a challenge because as you design, you may see that your view of what the requirement was as it was implemented is different than what they had in mind when they defined the requirement. Customers must also wait until the project is over to enjoy any tangible benefit from the project. And we'll get into how that differs from Agile, and how in Agile you could benefit before the project's actually finished. So again, the main issues here are, what if we don't know how long the project needs to be? Or what if they change their minds in the middle of all this? Maybe the requirement they needed is no longer needed by their company. And again, what if they demand changes but won't let me change the budget or the timeline? And then what if they want to see results before we're ready? So it's really, and this is kind of the whole thing, is that it's really difficult to go back upstream. So you generally wouldn't want to show them anything before test. But again, that could be a year, 2 years into development for some of the bigger projects that you may work on. And so this is kind of the main issue with the waterfall model. And that's what Agile works to solve. Basically, some heavyweights got together and came up with the Agile Manifesto. You can read this little blurb right here and then check out the link below. Okay, so jumping into the manifesto, this is focused on software development projects. We are uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it. Through this work, we have come to value individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation. We all like that one. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. And so Agile definitely tries to become a lot more limber in its handling of customers and requirements. So that is, while there is a value in the items on the right, we value the items on the left more. So the 12 key principles of the manifesto, number one, our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. Number two, welcome changing requirements. Even late in development, Agile processes harness change for the customer's competitive advantage. We also want to deliver working software frequently for a couple of weeks to a couple of months with a preference for a shorter time scale. Also, business people and developers work together daily throughout this project. We build projects around motivated individuals, give them the environment and support they need, and the most efficient and effective method of conveying information with and within a development team is face-to-face conversation. Number 7, working software is the primary measure of progress. The Agile processes promote sustainable development. The sponsors, developers, and users should be able to maintain a constant pace indefinitely. Number 9, continuous attention to technical excellence and good design enhances agility. 10, simplicity. The art of maximizing the amount of work not done is essential. Number 11, the best architectures, requirements, and designs emerge from self-organizing teams. And lastly, number 12, at regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective, then tunes and adjusts its behavior accordingly. Okay, so what does all that actually mean? So let's take a look at waterfall versus an iterative life cycle. Now the iterative life cycle, this actually can fall into the iterative style, but Agile kind of employed that as well. Agile is much more than just the life cycle development, but it also it contains within it the iterative process. So here you can see the waterfall life cycle. And this is how we can tell Agile, or see the benefits of Agile, is by comparing it to the old school style of development. So again, with the waterfall lifecycle, we have plan, analysis, design, code, test, and deploy, and they work in that order, and every single one of those depends on the process before it. And the thing is you can't really get away with that. Even when you look at the iterative style, it still follows that plan for the most part. But it just cuts it down and tries to iterate over it. So looking at the iterative, we do have plan, analysis, design, code, test, and deploy. And that's essentially the exact same thing. But in that 24-month cycle, we have had 3 releases of the same code. So the goal is to extend functionality over each iteration, but to put out a working product as soon as possible. Here's a side-by-side comparison of those. So we have design up front, everything up front versus a continuous design, fixed scope versus flexible scope, deliverables versus features and requirements. They freeze design as early as possible, and then obviously with Agile you freeze it as late as possible, and eventually with Agile you do have to freeze. I mean, if you're at Apple and you're developing Apple software, that's fine, it can go on indefinitely. But if you're actually, say, on Orion and you're going to fly to Mars in this thing, at some point you have to have a fixed machine that works in a certain way. But the goal is, and we did use Agile while there, is to be flexible with it to the last possible moment. With the traditional, you have a low uncertainty, and with Agile you have high uncertainty. Traditional avoids change, Agile embraces change. Low customer interaction with traditional and conventional project teams. Agile, we have high customer interaction. We interacted with our customer every 2 weeks. So we had a NASA representative on the phone when we'd run a demo every 2 weeks, and they'd get to see how the product was working and functioning. And then we have self-organized project teams. All right, so prototyping is a huge piece of Agile. Basically runs build it, assess it, modify it, repeat. So continuous integration, verification, and validation of the product. You want frequent demonstrations of progress to increase the likelihood that the end product will satisfy the customer's needs. And here's the big one, early detection of defects and problems. So following that cycle, we try and get a working prototype, just even if it's the most base model of what our end goal is, out the door as fast as possible. And what this allows us to do is push through to the end to a basic delivery, and we can see some of the defects and requirements that may need to change other requirements that we had on the project. So here's the Agile model. Focus on customer value, iterative and incremental delivery, experimentation and adaptation, self-organization, and continuous improvement. Okay, so let's take a look at the Scrum method. This is just a component of the Agile process. And it essentially is how we break down the story. So in Waterfall, you generally had the WBS. You still apply that here, but we have a lot of different terminology, and it also jumps into actually the development life cycle. So it's kind of a crossover of both. The product is composed of features as described by one or more user stories. So again, that's kind of that WBS that we saw earlier, but instead of a working point, we call it features and user stories. So user stories break down features, and features break down the product as a whole. So a feature delivers functionality to the customer according to the function described in a user story. Features and user stories are prioritized by their perceived highest value, and then the team tackles the highest value priorities first. Priorities of feature backlog are reevaluated after each iteration. Each sprint produces fully functional features. Each feature involves analysis, design, build, and test. So again, your sprint is essentially the iterative process. That's going to start your 2-week cycle up to a month cycle, depending on the team and how they want to break it down. But essentially, that's going to be the cycle that you work in. I think up to 3 months is generally how they look at it, and that's where you do your analysis, design, build, and test. And so now I'll take a look at roles. So you have your product owner. They act on behalf of the customer. They are the keeper of the feature backlog, and they also keep the team focused on priority objectives. They're the final authority on requirements, what's in and what's out, and they also decide when a feature is complete. So for a team role or a dev role is also what it's called for development or whatever. So you've got, they build the features. It's generally 5 to 9 people, self-organizing, no roles or titles across them. Everyone's equal on the team. And then they're the ones who provide input during sprint planning. So the Scrum Master is another role that's really important, and they're the facilitator. They resolve issues within the team, keep the team on process, and more of a coach than a manager. So they're kind of the ones, once we get into the layout of what a sprint may look like, you'll kind of see that the Scrum Master is the one who handles all those details. So what do some of the meetings look like? Again, they're built around sprints, and so a sprint runs a maximum of 4 weeks. A sprint team has 5 to 9 people. So you're going to have a daily scrum. So for the sprints, it's essentially your working status. So again, ours were 2 weeks whenever I was on with Lockheed, but here it says you can get up to a maximum of 4 weeks. I've seen other companies push it a little further as well. But like I said, the general goal is to keep them as short as possible because that's where you're delivering your features. And then a meeting that we have within a sprint is the daily scrum. So it happens at the same time and place and is generally around 15 minutes maximum. So all stand, which the goal is to keep everyone interested and not to let this thing drag out. We talk about what tasks we're working today and any blocks that we have on a whiteboard. So here's the main questions that you're trying to answer, which is what have you done since the last scrum or since yesterday? What will you do before the next scrum? And what is blocking you, or who is blocking you? So you'll find that sometimes features depend on other people, and you need to identify who's blocking so that way you can work to resolve that and get on. So jumping back to the Scrum Master, the one thing that they do not do is assign daily tasks to the team. It's actually the team, this is the self-organization part, that decides amongst themselves what tasks they'll take. The Scrum Master is really the master of the process, not the team. So making sure that the scrums are done correctly and that sprint is being applied correctly and things aren't slipping. At the end of the sprint, teams review the product features, and at the end of the sprint, the team reviews the process in a retrospective. So every 2 weeks, we used to have a retrospective, which is what did we do good, what could we do better. And so basically the team would analyze their actions and try and work to become more productive. So you've heard a couple of terms in here, backlog. So we actually have 2 types of backlog, and this is basically where you're going to keep all of the features and requirements. So the product backlog is a prioritized list of features and requirements. And this list, it's a list of work that needs to be accomplished, and it's generally owned by the product owner. The sprint backlog is a list of individual sprints, and each of those are tied to the product backlog, and then that is owned by the team. So let's talk resistance to Agile. I actually just came from a company. It was a great company, but there was an issue that we were switching to Agile, and they have actually resisted it for quite a long time. Now, again, I was working in an Agile environment, so they have moved towards it, but it's been hard for a lot of people because they have developed for 40 years under the Waterfall method, and moving into the Agile method, a lot of these key points that I'm about to read off really affected them. So Agile product management does not satisfy top management's desire for controlling budget, scope, and schedule. The issue is that whenever they negotiate these contracts, they actually have to have a timeline that comes out of everything. And so Agile doesn't really lend itself to that as well on big feature projects like Orion or something along those lines. It does work, and they were making it work, but it's much harder to than, say, working at Google or Apple or something along those lines. Many of the Agile principles, including self-organization and intense collaboration, may run counter to corporate culture. And it also requires a knowledgeable Scrum Master to keep teams focused on proper methods. And this is huge, because if you don't have a Scrum Master who is constantly being the one managing the process, you'll find that you tend to slip towards waterfall. Okay, so let's talk Kanban a little bit. This is just a method for managing work. It's visual and on the board, and it's for tracking work. Planned, in progress, and complete is essentially, you have storyboards. Now, Trello is a tool that you can use that helps you set up these storyboards, so it works really well to have a digital version of this without whiteboards, though I believe the whole goal is for it to actually be on a whiteboard. Obviously, this semester y'all aren't going to be able to have just a whiteboard that has all this sitting on it unless you happen to own one. But Trello is a good tool to look at if you're going to use the Kanban method. So the Kanban technique emerged in the late 1940s as Toyota reimagined its approach to manufacturing and engineering. Line workers displayed colored Kanbans, actual cards, to notify their downstream counterparts that demand existed for parts and assembly work. Kanban is the Japanese word for visual signal or card. The system's highly visual nature allowed teams to communicate more easily on that work needed to be done and when. It also standardized cues and refined the process, which helped to reduce waste and maximize value. So Scrum, again, that's your daily meeting. And Kanban are essentially the same thing. So it's a way to organize how to work day to day. They both embrace principles of agile development. Both encourage early and frequent delivery, self-organized teams, continuous improvement, high quality, and prioritizing of requirements based on business value. So we actually implemented both of these at my previous job. We did Scrum daily, but Kanban was done during release planning. So we would have a release every 3 months. And during that planning, we would actually pull out cards and set up these charts and basically break everything down for the 3-month cycle. Okay, so I mentioned Trello earlier. This is a project management tool. And so we're going to talk about tools that help you facilitate Agile. So what do these tools do? Well, they document your deliverables. And this is actually nice. You can go back and see how your features and tasks worked out. You can capture the work breakdown structure as as features and tasks. Plan the work, schedule the work, assign work to individual team members or to individual teams, plan sprints and work packets, track and report progress towards completion. So I guess if you're asking the question, are you agile? Your tool must support people over process and facilitate collaboration. Those are the two main things the tool needs to do to fit within the Agile framework. Okay, so creating a project plan. You can use Gantt charts. These are actually popular in mechanical. Whenever I was getting my mechanical degree, we used Gantt charts a lot. They follow the old style of the waterfall method really well, and I'm sure they can be implemented. I've never seen them implemented with Agile, but I'm sure that there is a way. But they provide work breakdown structure, predecessor, successor style, and hence that's why they really work well with the waterfall method. Resource assignment, duration, and calendar. So here's an example of one of these. And you can see we have marketing, and essentially the trees as they grow down and to the right, that's how the dependencies work. And so that's the basic layout of the Gantt chart. And that's the most popular one for waterfall. And then some other PM tools to look at. And these are all free tools that you can use for the Agile development method are Rike, Trello, FreeCamp, and Asana. So check those out. And then going deeper, y'all should definitely check out the Kanban and Scrum videos. Okay, let's take a look at crafting a vision statement. So what is a vision statement? It's a company's roadmap. It indicates who and what we want to be and become, sets a defined direction for company growth, and builds loyalty and enthusiasm. So what makes a good vision statement? There is no industry-wide consensus on this. But some things is that it should be concise, easy to read, remember, and repeat. It needs to be clear and set a primary goal. It should be future-oriented. Where are we going rather than the current state of the company? It needs to be stable, not subject to market and technology changes, so more in the abstract. It needs to be challenging and not easily achieved. Again, I said abstract as opposed to dependent on specific market and technology challenges. Enough to encompass the entire organization, and it needs to be inspiring, motivate the team members to follow. So here are a couple vision statements we got. We got Amazon's to be Earth's most customer-centric company, where customers can find and discover anything they might want to buy online. So notice that it's pretty abstract, at least in the sense that can find and discover anything that they might want to buy. So Tesla's vision statement: to create the most compelling car company of the 21st century by driving the world's transition to electric vehicles. Now notice that these, when we say non-dependent on market forces, you can still include your technology on it, but you don't want it to be dependent on creating gains through that. This is more of trying to become something, again, in the most abstract way possible. People use Facebook to stay connected with friends and family, to discover what's going on in the world, and to share and express what matters to them. Here's CU Boulder's vision statement: to be a leader in addressing the humanitarian, social, and technological challenges of the 21st century. And you guys can read through the rest of those.